It was the winter of 1943. The date, December 20th, a day when the sky over Germany was colder than steel and filled with thunder not from clouds, but from war, high above the enemy's heartland. A formation of American bombers cut through the icy air. Among them was a Boeing B-17 flying fortress named Ye Olde Pub. Its pilot, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, was young, determined, and facing his very first mission as commander. He was leading a crew of 10 men, each trusting him to bring them home. Their target was the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen, a fortress of steel and smoke that bristled with anti-aircraft guns. The moment the formation crossed into enemy territory, the German defenses opened up with savage precision. Explosions rocked the formation, black flak bursts filling the air like angry thunderheads. Brown's aircraft took 2 direct hits. The first tore through an engine, forcing him to shut it down. The second shredded vital systems, hydraulic lines, electrical circuits, oxygen flow. The cockpit filled with the smell of burnt insulation and cold wind screaming through jagged holes. Still, Charlie gritted his teeth and pressed on toward the target. His crew followed his orders with courage, but fate had other plans. When Ye Olde Pub finally dropped its bombs and turned for home, the formation began to pull away. The crippled bomber couldn't keep up. The damaged engines coughed and sputtered, and soon, the B-17 was alone, lagging miles behind its group. And in that deadly isolation, the hunters came. From the distant clouds, the silver specks of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s appeared, German fighters eager for blood. They circled in like wolves, sensing weakness. Within minutes, the bomber was surrounded. The first attack came from above and behind. Tracers streaked through the air, slicing across the tail section. The gunner, Sergeant Hugh Ecke Eckenrode, fired back until a cannon shell ripped through his position. He died instantly. Bullets tore through the fuselage, shattering glass, puncturing metal, and striking men. Inside, chaos reigned. Oxygen masks hung in tatters. Gauges spun uselessly, and the freezing air bit at exposed skin. Several of the crew were bleeding, their cries barely audible over the roar of dying engines. Charlie Brown himself had been hit in the shoulder by a bullet. His vision blurred as pain spread through his body. He fought to stay conscious, gripping the control yoke as Ye Olde Pub shuddered and began to spiral down toward the earth. For a moment, everything went black. When Charlie came to, the altimeter showed barely a few hundred feet above the frozen German countryside. Through sheer willpower, he leveled the bomber. The engines coughed, sputtered, and somehow kept turning. He steadied his breathing, blood soaking through his flight jacket, and muttered, "We're not dying here. Not yet." The landscape below was a blur of snow-dusted fields and dark forests. He turned the crippled aircraft west toward England, still over 200 miles away. Inside the bomber, the scene was horrific. The tail was nearly torn off. The nose cone was missing entirely. Loose wires sparked in the wind. Every breath came with effort, and the cold was merciless. But the flying fortress lived up to its name. Despite its wounds, Ye Olde Pub kept flying. Charlie guided the bomber low over the ground, hoping to avoid radar and flak. He didn't realize that his path would take him dangerously close to a German airfield. And on that airfield, a lone pilot was refueling his fighter. His name was Franz Stigler, a Luftwaffe ace with 27 confirmed kills. He was a veteran of countless air battles, a man who knew what it meant to stare death in the face. Yet despite all that he'd seen, Franz was not without a conscience. That morning, he had already been in the air once, intercepting the same bomber formation that Ye Olde Pub belonged to. He'd landed to refuel and rearm when a mechanic shouted, pointing to the horizon, "Ein B-17. Alone!" Stigler looked up. In the pale sky, he could see the faint shimmer of sunlight reflecting off metal. An American bomber, flying low, limping like a wounded bird. Without hesitation, he climbed back into his Messerschmitt Bf-109. The engine roared to life. He was about to add one more victory to his record, or so he thought. As Stigler climbed to intercept, he lined up his sights on the bomber. But something stopped him. As he approached from behind, he could see the devastation. The tail was shredded, gunners slumped motionless, the fuselage torn wide open. Through the holes, he could actually see the men inside tending to their wounded, doing everything they could to stay alive. He flew closer, so close that he could make out the pilot through the cockpit glass. his face pale, bloodied, determined. For the first time that day, Stigler's finger hesitated on the trigger. His commander had once told him something he'd never forgotten. "If I ever see you shoot at a man who's parachuting or helpless, I'll shoot you myself." To Franz, the men inside that bomber looked helpless. They weren't his enemies anymore. They were fellow airmen fighting to survive. He pulled up beside the B-17, close enough that Charlie Brown could see him through the frost-covered glass. At first, Charlie's heart stopped. He thought this was it. Their guns were either jammed or destroyed. The crew couldn't fight back. The German had them at point-blank range, but instead of opening fire, the Bf-109 pilot gestured. He pointed toward the ground, then back at Charlie, signaling for him to land. Brown, dazed and bleeding, shook his head. "No way. We're not surrendering," he whispered under his breath. Franz tried again, pointing emphatically. The bomber didn't respond. Then, realizing the Americans wouldn't land, Stigler made a choice few could ever imagine. He slid his fighter alongside the B-17's wing, flying formation with it. From the ground, German anti-aircraft gunners would see his Messerschmitt escorting the bomber and hold their fire. Inside Ye Olde Pub, the crew couldn't believe what they were seeing. A German fighter, flying beside them, protecting them. Charlie Brown, still gripping the controls, turned his head and looked into the face of his enemy. Through the glass, Franz Stigler met his eyes. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Two men on opposite sides of the same war, sharing a silent understanding. Then, without warning, Stigler raised his hand to his helmet in a salute. Charlie blinked, stunned. Slowly, painfully, he raised his own hand in return. The two aircraft flew together for several minutes, crossing the German coastline and heading out over the North Sea. Only when they were safely beyond the reach of German guns did Franz pull his fighter closer once more. He gave one last salute, then banked his plane away, disappearing back toward Germany. And just like that, he was gone. Charlie and his crew watched in silence. No one spoke for a long time. They couldn't quite believe that they were still alive. The B-17 limped across the sea, each minute feeling like an eternity. Fuel was almost gone. The engines groaned with every mile. But somehow the flying fortress refused to die. Finally, through the haze and snow, the English coastline appeared. Charlie brought the bomber down at the first airfield he could find, an Allied base in Norfolk. The landing was rough, one wheel failing to deploy, but they made it. The moment the aircraft stopped, medics rushed forward. Every man aboard, except the tail gunner, had survived. During debriefing, Charlie told his commanding officers the full story. The German fighter who spared them even escorted them to safety. But his superiors weren't interested in tales of mercy. They ordered him not to speak about it again. "We're not here to glorify the enemy," they told him. "Keep it classified," and so he did. The war went on, and Ye Olde Pub became just another name in the long list of missions and losses. Charlie Brown survived the war. He returned home, went to college, and later rejoined the U.S. Air Force. He served honorably until retiring as a colonel in 1965. But he never forgot that German pilot. The face he saw through that frosted cockpit window haunted him for decades. More than 40 years passed before Charlie spoke publicly about that encounter. In 1986, at a gathering of veteran pilots known as the Gathering of Eagles, he shared his story for the first time. The room was silent when he finished. Some were moved to tears. Others were skeptical. Could such an act of mercy really have happened? High above a world consumed by hatred and war? Even Charlie began to doubt his own memory. Maybe the concussion, the pain, the shock had distorted things. Maybe he had imagined it all. But something deep inside him insisted it was real. Determined to find the truth, he began searching. For years he wrote letters, reached out to veteran organizations in Germany, even posted ads in newsletters for retired Luftwaffe pilots. And then, in 1990, he received a letter from a man named Franz Stigler, living in Vancouver, Canada. The letter began simply, "Dear Charlie Brown, you were the pilot of that B-17 over Bremen, weren't you?" Charlie's hands trembled as he read. Stigler confirmed every detail, his approach, his hesitation, the salute, and the escort to safety. When the two men finally met in person, it was as if no time had passed. They embraced like long-lost brothers. Both were overwhelmed with emotion. For Stigler, meeting Charlie was a relief. He had spent decades wondering if the bomber had made it home. For Charlie, it was the closure he had searched for since that freezing December day in 1943. As they spoke, they realized something extraordinary. For nearly 40 years, they had been living less than 200 miles apart. Charlie in Seattle, Franz in Vancouver. They began visiting each other often, sharing stories at air shows and veteran gatherings. Sometimes they would appear on stage together, telling their incredible tale to crowds who listened in disbelief. "I could have destroyed you," Stigler once said. "But I couldn't pull the trigger. I didn't see an enemy that day." "I saw a man," Charlie replied softly. "You saved us all, Franz. You showed me what humanity looks like in the middle of hell." Their friendship lasted for the rest of their lives. They remained close until both passed away just months apart, in 2008. The story of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown became one of the most remarkable accounts of compassion during World War II. It stood as a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, light can still shine through. Two men, one German, one American, should have been enemies. Instead, in the frozen skies over Germany, they shared something greater than victory or defeat. They shared a moment of understanding, a decision that life, even in war, is sacred. Years later, a note was found among Franz Stigler's belongings. It read, "Charlie Brown was the reason I didn't lose my faith in people." And on Charlie's desk, there was a photograph of two old men standing side by side beneath the wing of a restored B-17. On the back, he had written, "My friend, the enemy who saved my life." History remembers many acts of valor, but few like this one. In a world torn apart by war, two men found a way to honor something deeper than duty or orders. They honored the shared humanity that connects us all. That day, above the frozen fields of Germany, a young American pilot and a German ace defied the madness of war. One refused to die. The other refused to kill in that single choice, made in silence. Thousands of feet above the earth, echoed through time as a symbol of mercy, honor, and the fragile beauty of compassion amid destruction. Because sometimes, the greatest victories in war are the ones that never require a trigger to be pulled.